All right, so getting serious here. My talk is titled Forests of Symbols, an Ecology of Images. And our panel, what's the title of our panel? Our panel is titled Pilgrimage, Relics, Symbols, and Rituals. And this is Craig Czury, Alifair, Skebe, and I'm John Roche. And I first started this talk, or started writing this talk, not too long after the last Cloudburst, and actually sent a couple of emails to Alan and so forth, I think Ken. And because some things had happened that disturbed me a little bit. I think it was a wonderful occasion, but there were some things that disturbed me a bit. And then if you notice, we have some different faces, partly because the House Organ folks, the House Organ magazine folks, for the most part, are not here. Kenneth Warren, the editor, and Steve Ellis, Brian Richards, Bob Podgorski, or maybe missing one or two others. Yeah, and I think that has to do, I don't know, I'm speculating. There are various reasons, but I'm speculating that it might have to do somewhat with last year when Ken was trying to explain the I Ching and the reason why we've had the I Ching as sort of helping to create the theme for Cloudburst and for the overall Cloudburst and the various things. Each year, Alan and I cast the I Ching and come up with a new hexagram that it becomes the basis for. So we were Ken was trying to explain that, and he was getting a lot of sort of resistance, to put it that way. And it occurred to me that there are various reasons to that. One was maybe that Ken was being a little bit, that was using terms that were a little bit difficult, maybe, as that was partly a matter of style. But I also thought that it was not just a matter of difficult, and I think Alan's going to be talking more about the I Ching and so forth tomorrow, right, in your talk, and also probably more about Cloudburst. I think in some ways it's good to have changes, new faces. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about how, this is the third event, the third Cloudburst, and probably the fourth will be even more, there'll be even more changes because any kind of institution or whatever goes through changes. So that's all fair. But anyway, I was getting back to this. So I was wondering, I was puzzled, okay, what's the resistance about? Okay, partly maybe just the style of how Ken and some of the others were using big words or whatever. But I thought it was not so much a matter of difficulty as a difference in outlook, okay? Reflecting how each of us came to poetry, how we were taught. Some of us are Buffalo people that went through a certain, some people went through St. Lawrence, some people went through different places, okay? So how some of it came to poetry, how we were taught, how our poetries express our particular views of the world, okay? And I think poets can be divided into those who consciously employ symbolic systems and those who don't, or at least think they don't, okay? So, but perhaps instead of systems, we can maybe use Baudelaire's phrase, forests of symbols, forêt de symboles. Because the word symbol is so, sounds like the Manhattan Project or something, or, very cybernetic and all that. So we could say an ecology of poetry instead of a system. I like that phrase as it suggests we can wander in a wilderness of symbols, and also suggests that symbols are the natural resources of poetry. All poets, of course, utilize symbols and metaphors, but not all rely on a tradition that has classified and coordinated a number of symbols and into an integrated whole, an ecology of images. Okay, so here's the part where I want you to look at the handout titled National Parks of Poetry. And what I did here was try to come up with a list of some of the main symbol systems that are widely used by poets, from antique times to the present, and to list a few of the poets associated with those. And we could quibble about these, and I probably forgot some of them. So if somebody says there, "Oh, you forgot," oh, good, I'll add it to the list. Okay, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So the Bible, and then the medieval Christian legends and iconography that follow from that, obviously Dante, Milton, Bunyan, Blake, etc. Greek and Roman mythology, as well as the Ptolemaic cosmology that goes along with that. So Dante, Shakespeare, Milton, Dryden, just about any poet who's ever lived, in the West anyway, has relied on Greek and Roman mythology. Astrology and tarot, which are actually connected to that, and related Neoplatonic and so forth systems. Dante, Shakespeare, Yeats, Eliot, Robert Duncan, Charles Wilson, so forth. The Grail myth and Arthurian legends, which also particularly popular at RIT because we have all these kids making computer games and writing fantasy novels, and they love that. And all that Game of Thrones type stuff, which I've never watched, but the courtly love, also coming out of the medieval period, the courtly love iconography, which survives unfortunately in pop songs. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? All right. And that, of course, comes from the troubadours of Provence, or Occitania, on the French-Spanish border, and a lot of evidence that it originally comes from Sufi poetry, from Rumi and Hafez, via either the Crusaders or more probably the Moors in Spain, and of course everybody. Well, not everybody, but a lot of poets have written in that tradition. The pastoral tradition, pastoral tropes, from Hesiod and Virgil on down. Native American and Mesoamerican myth and art, and the global shamanic traditions. The I Ching, here we are way down number 8. I Ching, Tao Te Ching, Zen stories, so Chinese and Japanese poetic traditions and mythic traditions, Celtic mythology, Norse mythology, Egyptian hieroglyphics and myths. Somebody wrote a whole book about Walt Whitman's use of hieroglyphic imagery. Okay, the Kabbalah, Hasidic tales, Jewish myths, the Bhagavad Gita, Vedas, Upanishads, Hindu mythologies, Buddhist scriptures, Indian Buddhist scriptures, Tibetan Buddhist texts, the Quran, Sufi tales, Islamic texts, Gilgamesh, Sumerian, Babylonian texts. And again, we could fill in a lot more authors for all of these during our time. And then idiosyncratic symbol systems, that is people coming up with their own. Of course, William Blake said, I have a choice of either creating my own system or being enslaved by another's. So he came up with his own system, in the prophetic books, those Jerusalem, Milton, and so forth. Although heavily reliant on the Bible for his imagery, and also various Neoplatonic traditions. Charles Olson in Maximus, creating his own mythology, but again pulling in everything, right? As David could tell us. Every tradition coming in there, from Sumeria to the Norse to the Irish to Native American. What am I leaving out? Too much, right? Okay. And then Tolkien, right? Yeats, A Vision, all the science fiction authors creating their own worlds, their own mythologies, their own languages, and so forth. And well, I'll skip over this last part here, but so what's the the takeaway, I guess, from that is that the takeaway from that is that myth systems are ubiquitous. Many contemporary poets believe they don't belong to any mythic tradition. We like to think we pluck our metaphors right out of thin air by virtue of our own genius. We joke we get them from the muse. But as soon as we use terms like genius, muse, or Aeolian harp, we find ourselves in a romantic poetry tradition that draws on Greek and Roman mythology. And if you say you're inspired or enthused, you're actually saying you are filled with the Spirit or possessed by God. Notions common to poetic traditions in Africa, Ireland, many other lands, most prominently associated with the biblical prophetic tradition, okay, which Blake actually consciously was doing. But so it's like everywhere you go, you're running into myths. Everywhere we turn, we find language itself is metaphorical. Every rock we turn over reveals fossil poetry, as Emerson pointed out. He said our language itself is fossil poetry. It's full of metaphors. Much as we wish we might use words in clinically antiseptic ways, free of any but clear, precise, drunken white meanings, our words betray ambiguity, are fraught with complexity, are haunted by demons. They are not passive tools, but gateways into ancient mythic worldviews. Glimpses into a time when the hills and streams echoed with the songs of nymphs and fairies and naiads. The very language we are speaking today is embedded with the Weltanschauung of a Proto-Indo-European culture that existed in the Pontic-Caspian steppe between the Black Sea and the Caucasus during the late Neolithic period, 4th millennium BC. Robert Graves and the White Goddess found more specific and more controversial origins for many poetic techniques, such as rhyme. Whatever the case, English certainly reflects what the poet Robert Duncan called the truth and life of myth, as it was perceived by Celts, Teutons, Romans, Greeks, and many other ancient peoples. Okay, you might object, but what does myth offer us? A forest of symbols is an ecology of the imagination. Like Robert Duncan's Oft I have been permitted to return to a meadow, it is a field for creative play, for a muse meant, not to be confused with an ideology or dogma or meta-narrative, though it can become an excuse for saying, as when the Madonnas that gave such life to medieval and Renaissance art became the strident Mariolatry that walled off Blake's Garden of Love, or when the neoclassical poets of the 18th century simply sprinkled in classical allusions rather than integrating them into an organic vision. Only poetry and art that insist on the local story, the petit récit, can save the forest from becoming monologue and monoculture. So I had, if I had more time, I'm running out of time, but if I had more time, I had some, some questions, which I'm looking in the back here. I was looking at, first of all, looking at things like, meta discourses that are supposedly logos-based, not image-based. They're supposedly scientific and not mythical. Freudianism, Marxism, feminism, capitalist economics, positivist science. And it's, and of course, you can look through any of those and find myths embedded in them. Freud, of course, basically an Englishman, went bad. But everything, almost everything he uses is quite, is overtly mythical. But I had to, I just, if we have like maybe 2 minutes or something, questions. Can poetry exist without symbols? Can symbols exist independent of symbol systems? A couple of questions. Are mythic systems inherently totalitarian, patriarchal, and so forth, or not? Can they be democratic, multicultural, feminist, anti-hierarchical? What's the difference between totalism and ecology? Is French symbolism anti-symbology? And so forth. So a lot of questions which we probably don't have time for, but maybe we will. Maybe have time for one answer. Someone who wants to at least tackle one of those questions before we move on. Yeah.
Well, if the meaning of a symbol is lost, then I assume that there are symbols that we have no idea what they even refer to. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So so if you're using symbols you don't know the meaning of, then are they still symbols? That's a good point. Yeah.
The use of symbols that we don't understand brings to mind the way the scientific revolution of the 15th and 16th century drove out the alchemical way of understanding.
Even though they were all trained in that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now if you I've picked up major works about alchemy. I'm going to get into this stuff.
Yeah.
And I find that it's gibberish. We've actually changed our consciousness to the extent that there is a former consciousness out of which the world before that revolution lived. And so reading those symbols and that symbology is it's a lost symbology, and yet confronting oneself with that lostness within that symbology is actually quite an experience.
Yeah, and of course that the whole alchemical thing got resurrected basically by followers of Goethe in the 19th century, and some of them were leading scientists like Ørsted, Stefan Novalis. I mean, people who discovered electromagnetism and so forth. They were doing it because they were looking for alchemical things. So that was very much still alive until the 1850s when Agassiz and so forth, and and Spencer and so forth drove it out. But it was still around, and then it resurrected again in 1920. That's a long other conversation. But I guess the other thing that I would say is that even if in terms of poetry rather than science, in terms of poetry, I mean, you literally can't read Shakespeare deeply without knowing a lot of this stuff. You can't read Dante, you can't read Milton, you can't, So just from a poetic point of view, I mean, it is, in that sense, it's our national resource. Even if we don't agree with any of it now, you can't really understand where they're coming from unless you know their worldview, and it's steeped in these traditions. Yeah, Paula?
So if I come at this from rhetoric and language, not all the way, to me, which is the idea of symbol as being equal, or in a way trying to pull it into sort of a reductivist kind of, like we can't get out of symbols if we don't understand the symbol. I mean, in my poetry, I try to explode it anyway. That words mean different things to different people, and that's what the rhetorical triangle is about. In that communication, every audience member, every reader is different.
Sure.
The word moves beyond and outward, So I mean, unconsciously, we're all part of a certain culture. Women oftentimes write using nursery rhymes or fairy tales.
Sure,
because it's part of
that should be on the list here.
It's the language. Well, I said the feminist stuff would be crazy in that. But I mean, it's a language that we hold, just like the way we feel. I mean, I'm cringing a little bit with categories.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
yeah,
do
yeah.
anyway.
But I also am not talking about a one-to-one correspondence. I'm not talking about a closed symbol where X equals Y. I mean,
because
yes.
that's what the minority cultures pretty much do.
Yeah, Martha?
Well, I think Paulette's getting at something that I just wanted to ask. You use the symbol in different ways, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think both of us, Chris, we mentioned this one before so many times, and a lot of times he using historically. So what are the different ways that you can use
Right,
the
right.
symbolism?
And Martha studied with Olson. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. I mean, there are many ways. Yeah, yeah.
John,
Stephen.
we
could wrap it up. Maybe just one more.
We have time for questions
Yeah.
after the panel.
Steve.
Everyone goes.
I think what a lot of people are forgetting is that language, words, and symbols are a subtraction from the reality. Like when someone says, "I'm wearing a shirt that's blue," you imagine a blue shirt. You don't imagine everything else about the shirt. So when it comes to the symbol system, it's extremely exclusive to use symbol systems, and it's a lot more inclusive to use symbols and make up your own system as you go. Whether you're reusing symbols from the Bible, as long as you're using them in a way that's unique to you or not cliche, you can be more inclusive of multiple interpretations from many different people. Symbol systems, if you're following them, tend to exclude a lot of people who don't understand that specific system.
So you're talking about ways of making it new or changing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, although I think this is a very impressive description of symbol systems in our canon and around it, I am not sure that that's how we do or should approach writing a poem.
You pay any attention to the syntax thing,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And below symbols, aren't there archetypes? We're gonna go union.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they give a rise to language, to
Yeah.
symbols, to consciousness.
Well, I mean, I was incorporating those. Yeah. Okay. And now, Craig, Czury. There's something completely different.
As you draw on the walls, pretend you're on a balance beam. The farther you go, be careful of the chestnuts. They have prickly shells. Your mom is putting on a shell necklace. Trees fall. People scream and kiss. Only you and your dog. Deeper into the woods, grind the bark. Try to fly like a bird. Pretend you're writing a letter to someone. A bird grabs a rope and lifts your sister to the roof. Rituals as children's games, as the ritual of waiting for the bus, the ritual of walking to school, the ritual of dinking around on the way home, on your bike, the ritual of dinner dramas, guests, dinner with guests, that ritual. Secret forts, hiding places, the rituals of dinking around at the river, the creeks, the swamp, hanging out in junk cars, abandoned houses, the rituals of found objects, spy games, forbidden places, the rituals of punishments, the rituals of pretending you're paying attention, spy games, the wildest thing that ever led you to a punishment, the funniest thing while being punished, weasel games, the ritual of weaseling out of a situation, school tests, homework, chores, the rituals of substitute teachers, the rituals of dirty tricks, sleepovers, pushing the bus driver's buttons. You need rocks, water, a stick. You need a door with a lock, a closet, a bed. You need 3 ignorant brothers, 1 old grandfather, trees outside your window, old stone steps, a can of spray paint, birds flying around. You need a fallen tree, a blanket, 2 mothballs, a giant rock in the stream in the woods, a waterfall, train tracks. You need people telling you what to do. A tall hill with a path, a dike along the river, pine smell. You need a lot of sticks, a fire, big white rocks. The personal rituals of each morning stepping out of bed on your left foot. The personal ritual of pulling on your pants with your left foot, pulling on your sock with your left foot, pulling your arm through a sleeve of your shirt with your left arm, shaving from the left side of your face, and the need to, at times, rearrange your chromosomes. Step out of bed on your right foot. Step into your pants. Reverse all of your traditions. You'll reverse the ways you think about the world. You need a witch, a special place for the witch, a child, a mother, and her friend. You need 6 or more children. The mother sits in the pretend house, and the child comes and says, "Mommy, can I have some cookies?" The mother says, "Let me see your hands. They're dirty. Go to the well and wash." Suddenly the child runs back and says, "Mommy, Mommy, there's a witch in the well." The mommy says, "Go wash your hands." "But there's a witch in the well." The mother says, "Well, come on," and takes your hand and walks with you to the well. When the mother sees the witch, she says, "What are you doing in the well?" The witch answers, "Sharpening my knife." "To do what?" The witch says, "Cut your head." The witch jumps up and chases you. The first one caught is it. Next time. Your mother wants you to clean your room, but you go to your room and play records. And she will ask you if you are cleaning your room, and you will say yes. And you're just messing it up again. At night, wander around your backyard with your eyes closed, randomly reaching for and kissing the dark air. The words of your next poem will spell themselves on a Ouija board. First you get a rock, and then you kick it to how far you want it. Then you kick it more, farther away. You need 2 or 3 couples. A preacher, flower girls, best man, shredded paper. They act like they are all walking down the aisle. The preacher goes through the services, and they place a ring on the girl's finger. They kiss, and people start throwing shredded paper as rice. They are married for a week. Fold your poem into a dunce cap and wear it in the corner. Standing upside down, Sirsasana, yoga style. Explain to the great tantric readers of poetry, you're an ice cream cone. You need a house, you need a ball kind of flat, 2 or more people, an arm. You take the ball, and your yard has to be on the other side, and you throw the ball over it, the house to the other, and then it's the other person's turn. If you make it over, your dog gets it. And if you can't get it in 30 seconds, you lose and you get the point. On the sidewalk cement, while the sidewalk cement is still wet, write your poem with a stick and run to the house across the street for cover. House with the same last name as an obscure Hungarian Kabbalist, Czury, claiming to be a big fan. The old man who answers the door is nose-bleeding ink. You need 2 people, a knife, grass, and bare feet. You need to be 2 feet away from each other. The person who gets the knife throws the knife toward the other person's feet. And the first person to move or budge loses. I started gathering these rituals in 1981 while hitchhiking around Montana and Idaho. I wanted to find out the games. I wanted to redefine games when children were continuously supervised and the games were organized. The games that were played in between the games is what I was after. And for me, redefined not just rituals of the imagination, but the everyday rituals that our kids needed to have their own lives unsupervised and unorganized. You have to be in Naples, New York. You need a road. You need 2 people. One lays in the middle of the road like he's dead. The other waves down a car. And when the car stops, you take off. But you don't do it to teenagers. Thank you.
Couple of short responses to
Yeah.
There was an article in the last couple of months in the Atlantic about the overprotected child.
Oh, yes.
And some of the things you were talking about, I was wondering, and you got to it actually toward the end of the presentation, whether kids have those things anymore, if they're constantly in the car going to the soccer game or the dance class or there's structure.
In my English Comp 102 class, which is supposedly writing from texts, I teach Studs Terkel's book, Writing, or Working, teaching them an interview style, but my main concern is to teach my students to leave campus and how to talk to strangers. They're terrified.
Yeah, how to talk to strangers.
My first assignment is interview someone you admire on campus, and there's academic research that goes with this. My second assignment is interview someone who has a job you never want to have in your life. It's like, what? You go up to somebody and say, your job sucks, let's talk. The social skills. It's a goal of mine to teach these damn kids to leave home and talk to strangers. Yes. Thank you, please.
Okay. The panel, to me, speaks about pilgrimage, and it's going to go through a sort of wandering through thinking through pilgrimage, which picks up on relic and picks up on the sacred and picks up on symbols. And I use big words. Sorry. You need the mic turned
I
up?
think the mic is not
I
working.
don't
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
Closer?
A little closer. Try.
Should I speak up?
That's it.
Okay, just
Yeah,
don't,
yeah.
don't hold
can't.
it.
Yeah,
Just
The
keep it
mic
close.
will only contain small words.
Oh, get that word out. Go ahead.
To throw the whole thing out now. This is quote, "A wandering animal like myself." That's a quote from Charles Olson's Human Universe, looking at pilgrimage as process. Pilgrimage is a process by which all things take on a sacred dimension. In his brief essay, Human Universe, Charles Olson problematizes humanism by way of direct treatment of the thing. He writes, "What really matters, that a thing, anything, impinges on us by a more important fact, its self-existence, without reference to any other thing. In short, the very character of it calls our attention to it, which wants us to know more about it, its particularity." Through this passage on thingness, it would seem to be an objective discussion of objects we might perceive. Olson quickly turns to the inness or isness of the human being as a thing within the world. In our modern world, he argues that science has stripped the holy from the human, and thusly the spiritual breath of man, understood as operating inextricably within the phenomenal field, is lost, relegated to a marginal space. To remedy this problem, he insists, there must be a way which bears in instead of away, which meets head-on what goes on each split second. He argues that man must take up the occupation of centering the use of anything in himself, that one must begin to experience and to capture in a slow and deliberate way the moments of everyday living. He concludes with an incisive directive. If man is once more to possess intent in his life and to take up responsibility implicit in his life, he has to comprehend his own process as intact, from outside, by way of his skin, in, and by his own powers of conversion, out again. Implicit in his statement is an assumption that each human has his own process of conversion that is, 1, comprehensible, and 2, will, once comprehended, lead him to a state of possessing self-intention and responsibility. Olson briefly makes a side comment concerning the people of Gloucester, Mass., with whom he had been living for some time. He observes that their skin is not taught from definition, finitude, and overbearing representation to make meaning of their lives, but hangs loosely about their bodies. Their eyes reveal the deepest nature of man within his own universe, what Olson calls a wandering animal like myself. Wandering animal, I argue, alludes to pilgrimage in its most intimate, primitive, and spiritual state. Man's life is a holy expression of his pilgrimage through life. From birth to death, he wanders the earth as he reaches for the heavens. The process of pilgrimage is shaped by intention, and intention is a sacred act that makes a relic of thought. Man must choose from the phenomenal field to hew his experience. It is a philosophically romantic and Kantian process of taking the chaotic stuff of the world and fusing it with one's own imagination to create the individual and the intentional, the new that comes of the old. All material is made sacred through the imaginative process. It is an alchemical process of the soul. A famous pilgrimage site stands in the northwest corner of Spain. It is the Santiago de Compostela, an 11th century sacred site marking the tomb of St. James and home to a 16th century university. St. James is fabled to have died in 44 AD, and his body was ferried to Spain by his disciples on a little boat from the Holy Lands. He was buried in the Basque region in the Compostela, or Field of Stars, and legend has it that he was discovered by a shepherd who one night witnessed St. James' guiding star, which led him to the sacred site. It was then that his remains were consecrated as a holy relic by the Catholic Church. Thousands of pilgrims have walked the 500-mile-long Caminos or the tributary routes of Santiago for 1,200 years. The way is said to represent the Christian triumph over the Moors. A pilgrimage of as grandiose as the Caminos sheds light on the larger communal significance of both wandering and of undertaking an arduous physical journey in order to understand the intimate spiritual journey of man. For over 1,000 years on the Caminos, each pilgrim takes up the symbol of St. James, a scallop shell, to carry for the duration of the trip. The shell also stands for the identity of each individual pilgrim. Pilgrims walk for nearly a month on the 500-mile trek, intimately getting to know their level of endurance, the movements of their bodies, and their physical limitations, as well as their physical capabilities. The walk takes the individual outside of the realm of daily existence and paradoxically connects the individual to nature, to the community, and to oneself, and to the divine. I forgot when I started this that I have poems to pass around. Craig, would you mind helping me with that?
All this?
There are two poems. There's the Camino, and there is HD's The Shell. Oh, you got it. Thanks. The story of St. James is similar to a number of ancient stories that describe the sudden appearance of a holy man who delivers new information, ideas, and technological advancement to a primitive people. The story is a trope for education and spiritual enlightenment in a new land. The pilgrims walk the way to contemplate the journey of the sacred hero or holy man who comes from afar to bring good news. It is a story of the power of learning and the development of knowledge. An anonymous poet wrote the following poem, The Camino, which you're about to get, in 2003 near Navarra, Spain, to explain the experience of the journey. And I'm just, before I read this, I'm going to say I have some sacred relics in the form of preserved cheese and culture. One of which is a sheep's milk cheese from Navarra called Roncal, which is commemorative of this shepherd. And there are a lot of shepherds, sheep in the Basque region. The second one is called Le Secret de Compostelle, which is commemorative of the Santiago de Compostelle. Again, another kind of living relic, I mean very living, there are living cultures in cheese, that I have to share after this. So make sure you get a little of that. Okay, the Camino. When we started, we did not know exactly why we were doing it. We had lives which were more or less satisfactory. We had friends, known much of our lives. We had children changed from chrysalises to butterflies. We had things like machines, things like music, things like pictures, things like shelves full of books, things like money and pensions and security. We did not have one thing, and maybe that was why we started. When we started, we put one foot in front of the other. We still did not know precisely why we were doing it. The miles passed, many of them pleasantly. Our feet blistered and were slow to heal. Our ankles turned to loose stones. The rain beat its way through our clothes. The cold chilled the marrow of our bones. Some nights, refuge was hard to find. Some days, miles of hot dust had no fountains. When the first few of many long days had passed, we found, without words, that we no longer walked together, that together we spoke in our own tongues, and often of things we had left behind where we began, that together we shut out new experience with the wall of our togetherness, that alone we spoke in other tongues and of our common experience, that alone we were open with interest and curiosity. Often we met with gladness at the end of the day. To know our paths went on together was enough. When we got to the cathedral, we sat down. We saw, through the eyes of those long before us, the blinding faith, the crucial thirst for salvation, the tower slowly closing off the sky. And we counted our blessings, several hundred of them, starting with the kindness of ordinary people on the way, and with the warmth of other travelers on the road, travelers not at all like us, not in age, not in origin, not in interests, but warm across all these distances, and ending with the friendship and love we had left behind where we began. When we got to the sea at the end of the world, we sat down on the beach at sunset. we knew why we had done it. To know our lives less important than just one grain of sand. To know that we did not need the things we had left behind us. To know that we would nevertheless return to them. To know that we needed to be where we belonged. To know that kindness and friendship and love is all one needs. To know that we did not, after all, have to make this long journey to find this out. To know that, for us, it certainly helped.
Is this your poem?
Would you wait
No,
till I get
it's
to,
not mine. No, this is an anonymous poem.
Originally written in English or in Spanish?
In English.
Oh, in English.
It's written in
So
English.
Suzy's still coming around.
Father, when was it written?
2003 in Navarra, Spain, which is along the Caminos. The second to last line.
Wait.
Road, yeah.
Let me make sure
Are you
everybody
out?
gets- No, we're not out. I don't want to interrupt while you read it.
Oh,
To make sure everybody gets one.
okay.
So you guys back.
One more?
Yeah.
And the sanguesa means bloody?
What's that?
The sanguesa means bloody?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I bet it does.
Close comment.
Yeah,
Probably. Yeah.
probably does.
I didn't hear the question.
I said the sanguesa means bloody.
Yes.
The town. Yeah.
Can I go now? No?
No.
No, I don't want to interrupt the poem by passing out the poem. And then we're out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So just looking at the second to last line again, to know that we did not, after all, have to make this long journey to find this out, refers to the lessons of the journey, the secret of connecting the individual more deeply to the cosmos, the self, and his community. The end of the world is the sea. Indeed, our lives are less important than a grain of sand, and yet, here we are experiencing love within the universe. The line's wisdom, we did not have to make this journey to find this out, reflects the same attitude of Olson's people of Gloucester. There are those who have discovered the ability to make a sacred pilgrimage of each moment of life, and they do not have to be abstracted from daily existence to realize this. Their skin hangs loosely, a metaphor for their daily attitude toward life. Because it is present to each moment, it does not pull inward, but stays loose, open to receive messages. Each person whom one meets throughout the day, even those persons known intimately, is like a visitation from a spirit guide who is offering a spiritual lesson. Our guides are nourishment in everyday interactions, giving us food for the soul. Still some, like those who walk the Caminos of Santiago, in the poet's words, know that for us the long journey certainly helped. These individuals must undergo the pilgrimage because it takes us from outside of ourselves in order to truly see inside, to truly experience the alchemical process of distillation and transformation of the self as a conversion. When reaching the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, pilgrims place a hand on the stones that men and women have touched for centuries. A human handprint is worn in place, a communal handprint of single hand touches made worn by the imprint of many human hands throughout civilization. It is a preserved relic that speaks of sacredness over time, connects us to history and pilgrimages of the past. It is beautiful to walk the prescribed tradition. Meanwhile, others can walk the daily path. John Fire Lane Deer, in his essay, The Meaning of Everyday Objects, writes of this process of seeing the sacredness in the mundane. He tells of an old dented soup pot filled with stew meat and potatoes that is cooking soup on an old wood stove for just an ordinary everyday meal. However, the cooking means more to him than just a meal, and through the essay, the experience becomes extraordinary, consecrated by its significance. He says, the bubbling water comes from the rain cloud. It represents the sky. The fire comes from the sun, which warms us all, men, animals, trees. The meat stands for the four-legged creatures, our animal brothers, who gave of themselves so that we should live. The steam is living breath. It was water, now it goes up to the sky, becomes a cloud again. John Fire speaks to the Western mindset those individuals who need to abstract themselves in order to understand the sacred. Although he pokes fun at the white man who sees so little he must see with only one eye, neither way is better than another. In fact, one may need the month-long walk to understand the way or the path in their everyday lives. For centuries, Santiago de Compostela was a condition of inheritance, a forbearance of imprisonment, as well as a religious practice. The secret of the pilgrimage is an initiation into a way of life and an understanding of the universe that has the possibility to carry over into daily existence for all men, be they grave, bad, good, or otherwise. John Fire explains to the non-initiated Western man, "We see in the world many symbols that teach us the meaning of life. We Indians live in a world of symbols and images where the spiritual and commonplace are one. To you, symbols are just words spoken or written in a book. To us, they are part of nature, part of ourselves. The earth, the sun, the wind, and the rain, stones, trees, animals, even little insects like ants and grasshoppers. We try to understand them not with the head, but with the heart, and we need no more than a hint to give us meaning." This passage describes the sacred hoot of the phenomenal world in which the human may choose to participate. How then does this expression come to pass? How does the poet, the artist, the craftsman play in the world and infuse each moment with sacred feeling? Journalist and inspirational writing teacher Brenda Euland offers her take on the matter by exploring the quality of in-ness. When she characterizes playing, she analogizes playing an instrument to playing the voice and the mind through language. Only when you are playing in a thing do people listen and hear you and are moved. It is because you are moved, because a clear and wonderful experience has taken place, and the music suddenly is yourself, your voice, and your eloquence. The passionate and wonderful questions in the music are your questions. And with all the nobility and violence and wonderful sweetness of Beethoven, say it is you talking to those who listen. Implicit in Ewan's argument is the message that you must be your own instruments. We play our experience through our senses and fuse them into language to create a world for the listener. It is our very feeling that expresses the phenomenal dimension, the holy and the sacred, if you will, of our very lives. We know immediately when a poet is disingenuous, tentative, boorish, searching for the right words. It is palpable. There's an energetic rush when the poet is truly playing in a thing. The thing itself is bold and blazoned. The words are the right words, and they do more than their place on the page and in sound. They reach to the very core of the listener and make you feel. As such, the experience of the listener becomes sacred. The listening to is a pilgrimage of sorts in which the listener is taken on a journey of the text, wherein no part can be separated from the whole. This is the expression of the heart rather than the head. I've heard it said that poets do not create great works in the time of war. Great works tend to flourish in peacetime. During the height of the Second World War in England, Hilda Doolittle penned her epic trilogy as both a response to war and a declaration of the triumph of the human spirit. Undertaking an alchemical spiritual journey, the speaker consecrates the individual by making human experience and human language expressions of the divine within the universe. And you have this poem as well, the HD poem, From the Walls Do Not Fall. She begins with the image of the shell in its core, fleshy animal within, which becomes a cryptographic metaphor for the self, language, ritual, and a poem. There is a spell, for instance, in every seashell. Continuous, the sea thrust is powerless against the coral. Bone, stone, marble hewn from within by that craftsman, the shellfish, oyster, clam, mollusk, is master mason planning the stone marvel. The artist or craftsman is a master mason, like the animal within the seashell, plans its masterpiece from within. The creation planning is a spell, a ritual that comes in the form of language, a poem to enact or to embody or to incite, to bring the thing into being. To express, to play inside to outside, the poem is shell, a beautiful, organic, created thing. Yet that flabby, amorphous hermit within, like the planet senses the infinite, its limits, its orbit of being, its house, temple, fane, shrine. It unlocks the portals at stated intervals, prompted by hunger. It opens to tide flow. But infinity? No, of nothing too much. The artist's shell is its temple. We hide behind our creations. Or the shell is a metaphor for the walls we put up between ourselves and the world, to create distance, to retreat, to survive. Still, we must open to the outside. Like the sea creature inside the shell, we need nourishment from the world. We are part of it and are not part of it. Our poems reach out to be heard, to be read. There must be a boundary lest too much be taken in. We can only sense so much of the phenomenal world before it might consume us. She turns to a metaphor of the self. I sense my own limit. My shell jaws snap shut at invasion of the limitless. Ocean weight, infinite water, cannot crack me. Egg in eggshell, closed in, complete, immortal. Full circle. I know the pull of the tide, the lull, as well as the moon. The octopus darkness is powerless against her cold immortality. Here, H.D. speaks to her public reception as a writer and the influence of critics, represented as ocean weight, the tide, and the moon. On the pilgrimage, the pilgrim attunes himself to the journey, hearing only the sacredness of the path and witnessing the sacred relics along the way. There is no room for external criticism, though there may be critics who dissuade the initiate from the path, encouraging him to give up. This relic critic, represented as octopus darkness, with strong tentacles and indeterminate reach, are deterred by her cold immortality. H.D. weaves her poem and the metaphor of the shell between the subjective and objective perspectives. In this way, she gives or gifts the power of the image to the reader. Thus, she, the indefinite third-person pronoun, refers to its antecedent shell with its small but incredible power of resistance, as much as it connotatively refers to the speaker of the poem. Thusly, anyone may also be this shell, the initiate who takes on the spiritual and poetic journey of the writer, the human, the pilgrim. And by extension, the individual's human expression represents its immortality, the immortal language, which exists beyond the mortal flesh. She returns to the poem's speaker in the next line to offer a lesson to the listener. So I, in my own way, know that the whale cannot digest me. Be firm in your own small, static, limited orbit, and the shark jaws of outer circumstance will spit you forth. Be indigestible, hard, ungiving, so that, living within, you beget self out of self, selfless, the pearl of great price. And I'm just 2 paragraphs away from finishing. Really want to finish my argument. The process of transformation or conversion to which the pearl alludes derives from the pilgrimage. We learn along the poem's way that human expression comes of going deeply within the self to understand the sacred within the mundane, and it is only through the process that language may emerge, the self out of self. Not a self-abnegation, but one closely resembling Olson's suggestion. If man is once more to possess intent in his life and to take up responsibility implicit in his life, he has to comprehend his own process as intact from outside by way of his skin in, and by his own powers of conversion out again. It is a self deeply involved within the world, giving sacred power to individual perception and expression. The pearl of great price is the mysterious, individual artistic expression that results from the process. It is the precious outcome of the alchemical transformation, the enigma of the triumph of the individual over adversity. A grain of sand, while unpleasant and an obstacle to comfort, gets turned over and turned over until it becomes a relic, a symbol of the mundane transformed into something of great beauty. For the seashell, too, is a wandering animal like myself. Coming to the end of this journey, I will recap the importance of pilgrimage, relic, and sacred for our purposes. Each focuses the mind and connects us to something larger than the self. This connection may be to a previous civilization and ancient history, such as the traditional pilgrimage of Santiago de Compostela. The pilgrimage may also connect us to the ancient carver, scribe, or poet, as in the case of the architects who constructed the cathedrals, stone carvings, and megalithic structures of ancient times. We might also be connected to the scribe of languages past through the sacred story, trope, symbols, or hieroglyphs. We may also be connected to ritual songs and poems long past or not so long past. We may also develop a connection to a larger-than-life human, animal, or elemental nature, deity, or the metaphysical universe. The pilgrimage and the sacred relics that mark the journey express our humanity, bring us in touch with our psyche and collective nature of man. Lastly, the journey that we undertake and express through language is a mystery with endless potential for discovery. The sacred continuously offers new messages. It may also reveal the secrets that rest in our own hearts, which may yet be hidden from ourselves. So I ask, what is your pilgrimage? What do you hope to find at the end of your pilgrimage? For what purpose do you make a pilgrimage? What tokens or relics along the way do you collect that speak to your process?
Some questions or comments for Alifair?
Alifair, you rock.
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful presentation. I love the use of the seashells and metaphor and the idea of the entity inside alive, creating the outside beauty and purpose. It's great the way you pull that through.
Nick.
Just a comment about how the pilgrimage applies to the poet. I'm a big fan of Lord Byron, especially Child Harvest Pilgrimage and Don Juan. And the poet's progress, especially in Byron's case, where his travels to places like Italy and Greece came out in his poetry so that he could speak for them and speak to them directly as an experience. I think the grand tour, which you kind of touched on, is a great part of the poet's life, which you can use different ways in your own experience. The poet's experience. I like it.
Stephen.
This presentation brings me closer to HD because I've had the embarrassing problem of just loving her prose, you know, tribute to Freud and all that, and being just feeling a bit distant from her poetry through her particular ritual ways of speaking. I'm recalling some of those things William Carlos Williams said about her and how ritualistic she was, wanting to spatter her clothes with ink before writing on some occasions. But this definitely, even though she did that, you know, that she was not that William Carlos Williams wants to do it, but no, and this was very helpful, and wherever you dug up an anonymous poem, that's so great that you did that. And I will say that I do think that the Olsen quote about in human universe is the skin of people who are comfortable in their skin. I think that refers to the Mayans that he was.
Oh, is it that?
Yeah, because he was writing that when he was among them. You can see him develop in this essay. Letters to Robert Greeley.
Poem Tyrian Businesses deals with that. Larry.
I'm at the age now where I see in some of what that means. Then when the kind of guy gets stuck, What is it like to look like only to 12? How much of what you talked about is discovered by that time? Since I'm only discovering it now at 75.
Well, all the stuff Craig talked about, you already knew at 12.
And that was your homework for this.
My mother did not let us run barefoot with knives.
Paulette.
But also, I mean, if you pull together the really, I mean, the idea of journey or pilgrimage or seeking meaning, whatever age or whatever it is, I mean, or even, it doesn't even have to be spiritual. I mean, I think that has a lot to do, in my opinion, to your students. My own students are constantly out exploring, but it's on digital media.
Right.
And I mean, in a way, they're discovering themselves. When they're doing papers and reports right now on playing with online identity. I mean, so I mean, the philosophers at the same time, you're dealing with Heidegger and these other people with the myself and other and thing and other. I mean, these are all somewhat related, you know.
Well, that's interesting, you know, because they're playing with all of these. They're immersing themselves, virtually playing with becoming all of these mythical creatures and beasts and fairies. And, I mean, they're living in them.
And mythical or not, I mean, if you're inventing an identity on Facebook, I mean, you're playing with. I mean, these are real journeys all the time. They're not. It's not the world that we're used to journeying. I mean, so that.
You know, that's a good point. That should be another panel too.
That could be a whole other panel.
What is sacred? Sacred doesn't have to be traditional sacred.
Yes, but
and
I want to inject.
Yeah, all right, yeah, go ahead. And then Edie.
I really love what you say, but what I find on Facebook is that authenticity is very problematic.
But I find that in poetry too.
You know, this is a wonderful trilogy: symbol, ritual, and journey or pilgrimage. There should have been another chair up there for authenticity.
Ah, yeah.
I just want to follow up because what this reminded me of is Martin Buber and the I Thou and the I It. Where the I It would be like an optometrist who looks into your eye and analyzes your retina and all the things that go into your eye in a very analytical way because he or she is a doctor. But a friend looks into your eye to see the sadness or the happiness, and that's the I-thou relationship. The not inventor, but the founder of positivism said that one should look at a blade of grass as if the spark of divine were in it. And that is also different from the way the botanist would look at it. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Or a cow.
Ghost corn.
Or a cow.
Who has what's that? Steve, I guess, right? Yeah.
That was very well written. I'd like to read that. I don't know if you have any copies.
I do have a copy that's in my hand.
Well, maybe we can put some of it on the blog, hopefully.
Yeah, that can work.
You'll email it to me.
I pretty much, I've kind of had done my own research on kind of reading everything you said, but something that really kind of bothers me when I did a lot of research on this stuff is the fact that that someone labeled attention to detail and knowing oneself and truly caring about other people as divine. And I don't know why that bothers me so much. Like the idea that making a pilgrimage to know oneself and to know one's place in the world and to pay attention to all of the ethereal and metaphysical things of objects and people is great. But at one point in history, someone labeled that as a divine outlook or something to look at as deity or God.
Wait, who just went off for 3 days with their
I think
daughter
that's weird.
without their cell
I
phones?
think everyone should have that.
Somebody in this room did, huh? Somebody, yeah.
We just
Mark?
got texted by.
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, he just went off with his daughter for 3 days without cell phone.
Yeah. Judith.
Well,
Or,
just to follow up with what you're saying, I think maybe you misrepresented a little bit something, one of the ideas that I was going for, and that's that the sacred or making something sacred does not necessarily mean divine. It does not necessarily mean toward a deity. It means that it's infused with meaning that exists beyond the self. And that could be in many different realms. You know, whether that's animal, natural, elemental, kind of larger than the self.
I wasn't saying that you said anything about that, but it was more like for all the symbols, the symbol systems that we use.
a lot
That
of them
attention
are.
to detail.
A lot of them are theistic, but not all of them are. But I also think that there's going back to the notion of the unsupervised play that you brought up, Craig, or something. And part of it is that notion of giving up control to something else. Something outside yourself or deep inside yourself. But giving up control is necessary at some stage of the journey. And our society often doesn't allow.
No, it's naughty. It's naughty. You're not supposed to be there. You're supposed to be looked after.
Yeah. Judith.
Well, I was having a couple of different thoughts, and I don't want to expand on them very far, but I want to mention them. One is there's more than one way to talk about symbols. And the thing that wasn't really in your discourse is the idea that the symbol is overdetermined. It always means more than simply one-to-one.
Right.
And it is always a kind of a cloud or a web of different things.
When will the swastika ever be an Anastasi's peace symbol?
Well, that's...
Well, but it
It's
was.
picked up additional symbolic meanings that are unfortunate.
But when? Or Sanskrit.
But the other thing I want to get at, and I don't know quite how these two things are related, but I think they are. And they're sort of in what you did too. But when Ali was talking, the idea that comes through at the end of that anonymous poem is kind of the Zen idea that if you're mindful, you don't have to do anything. It's there. And the purpose of the journey is to get mindful. It's one of the ways, not the only way. It's one of the ways to get mindful. The problem with explorations on the web is that they are not embodied experiences. You've got to do it with the whole body, or it isn't overdetermined.
That's a good point that has to be stressed more.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
The body always means more. There's always more feeling attached.
And again, that could be a whole other panel. I mean, the role of the body in this is huge. Bob.
Well, one thing I was thinking, people could, we were talking about the heart, how our whole body is a symbolic system. When you have a heart, you have an ear, you have a taste, you have, this is terrific, John, and thank you very much for doing it. And I also thought that all the stuff, you switch from colons to dashes, but all the stuff after those is just a small part of another mythic, symbolic system. We sometimes say the canon, but that that all of us use, and millions of people around the world use.
Thank you. I'm going to steal your thing, the American Indian talking about the heart, not the mind, and symbol as a hint. I love that phrase. Symbol as hint of what we already know. That's great.
Let me, one other thing that's not related, but when you were talking about pilgrimage, one of the things that's key about the concept of pilgrimage, I mean, even African Americans who go back to Africa and go through the slave doors, or that that sort of, is the idea that you're an individual doing this by yourself, but in a community.
Good, good.
You know, that because it's the it's the I that to find yourself, you almost have to be around others. And I just wanna say, most of us in this room are not in the world that a lot of young people are in social media. And they're not by themselves. I mean, you have this community, you have this journey. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't do it, but especially when I'm looking at gamers, you know, who are discussing and chatting, and I mean, and moving back to the students who just play in that cost, whatever it is, game or whatever. You know, so what I'm saying is that we reject symbols and groups and communities, and we all make our own pilgrimages in certain ways. I mean, it's not to say that the myths don't exist, but I think we recreate, and we create all the time as we come up with these statements.
What I suggest, that's dynamic, but bring in the high school kids then next year. Bring in the kids who can translate what we're saying into what they're saying.
Well, we do have two not
College,
high school, but at least college.
Right.
So we're getting in the right direction. Yeah.
Because I'm finding a whole lot out in these projects that my kids are doing, and I totally, and I'm on the web and the internet a lot, and
Okay.
I'm not on it the same way.
We need to.
Yeah,
we need to take
No comment.
Can we take 5 minutes and then Michael's reading?
Do you think we're gonna be able to
Yeah.
get out and get back?
Yeah.